What do you know is true without evidence? What are you certain of, right down to your bones, without proof? Back when I was 10, there was a competition for school kids to write a treatment for an episode of Doctor Who, with the best one being developed into a full episode in the next series, and the winner receiving a writing credit. I was a huge fan of DW at the time, and the competition was actually run through school, so my teacher made the entire class do it, but I was very excited. I began writing a story about the Doctor landing on a planet full of defective Cybermen, whose programming had gone awry and had been left on this asylum planet. The Doctor lands there in response to a mysterious distress call from a woman and attempts to find and save her, while avoiding the dangerous dysfunctional Cybermen and the looming threat of planetary destruction at the hands of the normal Cybermen. I finished my short treatment and gave it to my teacher to submit. Unfortunately, it turned out the competition was very strict about the formatting of submissions, and mine was returned because I had used the wrong formatting in some way. It seemed like a weird reason. I was a bit disappointed, and that was the end of that. But then, a year or two later, there was an episode of DW called Asylum of the Daleks, which seemed incredibly similar to my story except with Daleks. So incredibly, eerily similar, in fact, that to this day I am absolutely convinced that Stephen Moffat saw my script and came up with a formatting excuse so that he could remove me from the competition, steal my story, change the bad guys, and claim it as his own. I have zero evidence, of course. I don't even have the treatment I wrote or any letter from the BBC about my submission. And yet, I know in my bones that Stephen Moffat stole his script from 10-year-old me. Seems like Stephen Moffat's time machine wasn't just for the Doctor's adventures, eh? He must have used it to travel back and borrow his brilliant idea. Story 2. I'm quietly convinced I made a best-selling mystery novelist change the way he writes because I criticized him on Reddit. The novelist in question is Chris Carter. The books are the Robert Hunter series. Yes, the guy who has built a career on looking for serial criminals is named Hunter. He works for the LAPD's crime unit. It's not a series that's overburdened with subtlety, it's what I'm saying. They are as schlocky a bunch of thrillers as you could ever hope to find, but for some reason I can't get enough of them, despite the fact that they're very much not great. They lean pretty damn heavy on ridiculous tropes, and I've never seen a more Mary Sue lead than I have in this series. But the biggest complaint I have with them is that the same line appears almost literally word for word in the first 9 books. I made a comment about it on Reddit on an r/books thread about your favorite terrible authors, and I went back through all of the books published so far just to prove my point. The Crucifix Criminal, the famous line, doesn't actually appear in this book as far as I could find, but Hunter does drink scotch near constantly as the defining trait of his character. Across the room, a stylish glass bar looked totally out of place. It was the only piece of furniture Hunter had purchased brand new and from a trendy shop. It held several bottles of Hunter's biggest passion, single malt Scotch whiskey. The bottles were arranged in a peculiar way that only he understood. And so it begins. For the executioner, single malt Scotch whiskey was Hunter's biggest passion, but unlike most people, he knew how to appreciate it instead of simply getting intoxicated on it. Note that in this one and the next, Carter doesn't even use the Scottish spelling, whiskey rather than whiskey with the E, despite the fact that this is literally Hunter's only character trait. For the Night Stalker, Hunter's biggest passion was single malt Scotch whiskey, but unlike most, he knew how to appreciate its flavor and quality instead of simply getting intoxicated on it. For the Sculptor, Hunter sat at the bar and ordered a double dose of 12-year-old Glendronach with 2 cubes of ice. Single malt Scotch whiskey was his biggest passion, and though he had overdone it a few times, he knew how to appreciate its flavor and quality instead of simply getting intoxicated on it. And for the Hunter, Hunter's father had a passion for single malt Scotch whiskey, a passion that, frankly, Hunter had never understood. He found whiskey, any type of whiskey, way too overwhelming for his palate. I actually quite like this one. It's a prequel novella, so this one is a nice little meta throwback. It gets a pass from me. For One by One, Hunter would never consider himself an expert, but he knew how to appreciate the flavor and robustness of single malts instead of simply getting hammered on them, though sometimes getting hammered worked just fine. This is also the first appearance of the "but sometimes getting intoxicated works just fine, am I right?" addendum. It's nice to see Carter branching out a little, but after this, he never looks back. For An Evil Mind, single malt Scotch whiskey was Hunter's biggest passion. Unlike so many, he knew how to appreciate its palate instead of just getting intoxicated on it, though sometimes getting intoxicated worked just fine. For I Am Doom, Back in the living room, wrapped in a white towel, Hunter switched on a floor lamp and dimmed its intensity to medium. That done, he approached his drinks cabinet, which was small but held an impressive collection of single malt Scotch whiskey, which was probably his biggest passion. Though he had overdone it a few times, Hunter sure knew how to appreciate the flavor and quality of a good single malt instead of simply getting intoxicated on it. And for the collar, Hunter's biggest passion was single malt Scotch whiskey. Back in his apartment, tucked in a corner of his living room, an old-fashioned drinks cabinet held a small but impressive collection of single malts that would probably satisfy the palate of most connoisseurs. Hunter would never consider himself an expert on whiskey, but unlike so many, he at least knew how to appreciate its flavor and quality instead of simply getting intoxicated on it, though sometimes getting intoxicated worked just fine. The caller also gets double points for helpfully informing us that women just don't get the subtle nuances of Scotch. Hunter tried not to frown at her again, but he was sincerely intrigued. Women in general weren't very fond of Scotch whiskey, which wasn't at all surprising. Whiskey was undoubtedly an acquired taste, one that at first would certainly overpower anyone's palate and knock the air out of their lungs in the process. Hunter knew that only too well. The trick was to persist, to keep trying, to keep sipping it until one day it finally made sense. Women usually weren't that patient with drinks. They either liked it at first sip or they didn't. This, by the by, is how we know that the woman in question is trustworthy because reasons? And for the gallery, back in his apartment, Hunter had a small but impressive collection of Scotch that would probably satisfy the palate of most connoisseurs. He would never consider himself an expert, but unlike so many of his friends who also claimed to enjoy single malt Scotch whiskey, he knew how to appreciate the flavors and robustness of the malts instead of simply getting intoxicated on them. Though sometimes, getting intoxicated worked just fine. This post was made in January of 2019. In April, his book Hunting Evil came out and the line was nowhere to be seen. I didn't think much of it until his new book came out a few days ago and also didn't have the line in it. This comment is also one of the top answers if you Google his name and the book series via Reddit. Exactly what you'd do if you were looking to see if people on the internet were talking about your books. I also can't find any evidence of anyone else pointing this out in a review or such like. So yeah, in short, 3 months after I made that comment, he broke the habit of a decade of writing and finally decided that after 9 stories that used this as a crutch for Hunter's personality, it was too much. I know you're reading this, Chris. I know. Story 3. That gardening is a secret to happiness? Sounds super strange, especially coming from someone like myself, an ex-World of Warcraft gamer. I had kids, got busy with work, wanted out of the suburbs, got some land in the country, and started planting stuff. Years later, I have what I call a food forest. I have replaced lawns with fruit trees, bushes, vines, flowers, all woven together to mimic a natural forest, except everything in it is edible. And it has changed my life completely. I just think there's something about being outside in the sun, feet on soil, hands in the dirt, planting things, watching it grow in the backyard of your life, going out and checking on it and watching how much bigger it's getting, watching life find it, and now you get to live with the natural world, not isolated from it. Birds making nests in your trees, frogs making homes in your ponds, seeing bees all around your flowers, butterflies everywhere, rabbits and squirrels moving in, then owls moving in to eat those. It's this wonderful tropic cascade that you started, and it's incredibly rewarding. Plus, being able to just walk outside and get chemical-free, nutrient-rich dinner is amazing. You can see my food forest and my post history if anyone is interested in seeing what I'm doing. I actually think a big reason depression is such a big thing these days is because we have all become so disconnected from the life that we evolved in for the last 6 million years. We evolved walking around savannas and forests, pulling food off bushes and trees, out in the sun, feet in the soil, hands in the dirt. We couldn't be further from that, living inside our isolated homes, cars, and offices. It's no wonder we're also depressed. I think gardening is the secret to happiness. Story 4. That my ex was cheating on me for probably 2 years with her current SO. No proof at all other than suspicion and logic. 2 points really stick out in my mind. We started dating in a poly relationship that became monogamous after a few months. We were dating 3 to 4 years before I introduced her to the other guy, because he was an acquaintance from about a decade previous. Right after they met, she suddenly wanted to talk about becoming poly again. I didn't put that together until over a year after I'd broken up with her. The second part is that I heard through the grapevine they got engaged exactly a year to the day after I called it off, meaning that, say, I called it off on the 15th of whatever month, they got engaged on the 16th of the following year. Maybe it's just me being neurotic, but I would tend to think getting engaged on that date is significant like an anniversary. That would mean they started their relationship literally the day after I called it off. I mean, if that isn't suspicious, I don't know what is. And if you're enjoying the video so far and connecting with any of the stories, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 5. I believe there is a Republican conspiracy to keep termination legal for political gain. It was legalized during a Republican presidency, voted for by Supreme Court justices nominated by Nixon. They've had the power to overturn Roe v. Wade in the past, but it's never happened. Rates of termination rise during Republican administrations because they actively rail against contraceptives. Why? Politically, they need termination to exist so they can pretend to hate it. This makes them the white knights fighting for humanity, and millions of religious voters see this as the one and only most important issue and morally have no choice but to vote for them. So why don't they just finish the fight and make it illegal? Well, this would be counterintuitive. While it would briefly set them up as the victors and champions of the fight to end this, the celebrations would be like unwanted ones, short-lived and soon forgotten. By the next election cycle, they lose the battle leverage that they had before. They lose the underdog status. It's a stronger strategy to fight for an idealistic cause than to fight in defense of an existing cause. They keep evil in existence because as long as it exists and they are its enemy, they are the de facto good. Like America and Russia always claiming to hate each other even though they work together on science projects all the time. The people need an enemy, no matter what horrible things they do to hurt people in roundabout ways. They can always point to termination, and their religious base will see it as the Joker to their Batman. Batman may technically be a villain covertly funded by a corporate billionaire, but he's fighting the Joker, and that makes him a hero, damn it. But Batman will never end the Joker. Well, this is an interesting thought, and while I certainly believe politicians are shady and do stuff like this all the time, I can't say I'm going to agree 100% without some degree of some more evidence than this. Story 6. That Drogon is kinda brainwashing Daenerys in A Song of Ice and Fire, A Game of Thrones. He keeps giving her dreams and convinces her to burn the masters at Astapor and take the Unsullied with fire. The other dragons are freaking out during the scene, but he's perfectly calm. He's also staring her down the night before when she woke up from her dream. The Valerian Empire was built for the dragons. The dragons told the men what to do, empowered them with wisdom and magic, and built an empire of flame and lava and obsidian. And the eggs begged the Targaryens to hatch them. It's why they had their dragon dreams. It's why so many Targaryens looked to be reborn as a dragon and were driven mad. Aerion Brightflame thought he was a dragon trapped inside a man and died drinking wildfire. Aerys, the Mad King, wanted to burn them all and be reborn as a dragon. Baelor the Blessed would pray over his dragon egg to make it hatch. They heard a dragon's voice reaching into their thoughts, and some mistook them for their own thoughts. Dany had a miscarriage but wakes to only think of her eggs and is found crawling toward them. And all of this can be explained logically, but I know in my bones that there's more going on here. Story 7. I'm extremely, not really, certain that nobody has any free will and this universe will play out a certain way no matter what, and no other variations of it will ever exist. My reasoning is based on physics, chemistry. The electric signals that drive our brains or the chemical reactions inside our body are exactly defined and can never occur differently. In addition to that, I'm also pretty sure that our sense of consciousness is a continuous effect rather than a discrete one, meaning there is not a point in our aging or development when suddenly a flip is switched and we become what we collectively define as self-aware and conscious. Rather, the network of nerve impulses, sensory connections, and constantly attempted learned responses eventually build up this sensation that we describe as being conscious, where we're constantly processing sensory data and reflecting on it and deriving behaviors off of them. Story 8. Caitlin Bennett just has to be a left-wing comedian. If you were making a parody of Crowder, I'm not sure it would be physically possible to be more on point a parody than what she delivers. I mean, think about all the stereotypes left-wingers have about the right. Libertarians as fascist. She outright calls her media presence Liberty Hangout whilst advocating for Trump to declare a dictatorship to put down on black people. Poor arguers. Her videos largely consist of her going to college campuses, being very obviously owned, for lack of a better word, by the people she interviews. Lack of self-awareness. She edits out bad words with a noise coming from a woman who has a reputation for having messed herself at a party. She also helped plan the diaper protests. Speaking of, not knowing what owning looks like, there is a weird trend in right politics based on doing something obviously humiliating to yourself and then declaring the embarrassment the public feels about you as a victory. It's not a common thing per se, but it's very notable when done, like the diaper protest or the anti-vegans that ate raw meat so disturbingly that people became vegans. I can't think of anything a comedian could make as such a parody which would top her to the point where I feel it has to be intentional. There is being stupid, and then there's being stupid to a checklist. Story 9. Super whack opinion. There's no such thing as child ghosts. Like if you watch paranormal stuff and the investigators are like, this family is haunted by the spirit of a little girl. There's no such thing, because if ghosts exist, some kind of cosmic force must exist, and a cosmic force wouldn't punish a child who already had a tragic life by forcing them to stick around for unfinished business or whatever. Meanwhile, if demons do exist, it seems most likely that they would take the form of whatever they think humans would find the least intimidating, like, a ghost child. A less whack opinion? I think like a good 75% of the mysterious disappearance cases in the US that get posted all over the place and put into tons of YouTube videos and podcasts where people who started having bipolar, manic, schizophrenic, etc. episodes and happen to wander into a bad situation and not make it back out. This includes the guy who fled Canada and was found in a motel parking lot, Elisa Lam, etc. People would rather believe paranormal crap or ridiculous conspiracy theories over the Occam's razor option that the victim had an episode. Like people will claim schizophrenia isn't that common, etc. But in my opinion, it's not so much that it's not common, it's that mental illnesses are still ridiculously underreported in the US. Story 10. The Time Crafters. Hear me out. There are tiny entities, I visualize them as humanoid, but you do you, that create and recreate all the things in the world every moment. But sometimes, like you, they get distracted and forget to make something, like, say, your keys, which you are positive you just had. So you mention your keys and start looking for them in the spot where they are definitely supposed to be. After all, you literally just set them down right here. And the time crafters hear you and panic because they can't just dematerialize your keys in front of you. That would cause them more trouble than it could possibly be worth and expose their whole operation. So they wait on the keys, and when you walk to the other room to make sure you didn't set them down there, they remake them in their proper spot. You come back to where you thought they were, and lo and behold, there they are. You write it off as your brain or eyes playing tricks. The time crafters wipe the stress sweat from the brow, and everything carries on until the next time they get distracted and the cycle begins again. The time crafters are more likely to make errors when there's lots of clutter too, or when they can't anticipate what it is you need. Where's my old binder of Pokemon cards I haven't looked at in 13 years? Might take them a longer minute than, I always put my sunglasses in this spot on the counter. Oh, and some lost things are just an unwitting tithe to the time crafters who watch out for you. 100% certainty, no proof. Okay, so the next time I can't find my phone, I'll just blame it on the time crafters and wait for them to fix their mistake. Story 11. I believe I am responsible for Alex Rodriguez turning around his horrible season in 2009. Yes, I know that many sports fans think they can influence a player or team, but I really did it, folks. Allow me to explain. Like many Yankee fans, I was frustrated with A-Rod. He was always a bit of a schmuck and he choked in high-pressure situations. It seemed he'd only get the big play when the Yankees were already clinched to win a game, but never when we really needed that hit. So A-Rod started off the season abysmally. By the time the Yankees came to Atlanta, his average was .213. You see, I live in Atlanta, so I bought the whole series. It's only 1 out of every 6 years that my boys visit Atlanta, so I get the series every time they do. Another thing is Yankee fans are really good at taking over stadiums. And the Braves are a fair-weather team, so we were able to chant and cheer and basically drown out the Braves fans. We even were able to Yankee roll call games 2 and 3. I'm sure you guys think that's super disrespectful, but whatever, go Yanks. So we lose game 1 and A-Rod goes 0 for 4. He gets booed a few times because we're getting fed up with this. Game 2, Joba gives up a HR to Frenchie in the 5th, and we're losing 1 out. Cervelli ties it in the 6th, and then Jeter and Damon get on base. A-Rod is up, and we need a clutch hit. But A-Rod never gets a clutch hit. People were already starting to boo him. So I made a decision. If I can get him to be cheered on the road, maybe it'll fire a spark and get him out of this slump. So I start going crazy with, "Let's go, A-Rod, clap, 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 clap." And it picks up steam. The Yankee boos start to quiet, and Yankee fans around me pick up my chant. After all, we need a clutch hit, so why not? It spreads as A-Rod's at-bat continues. Within about a minute, Turner Field is booming with an A-Rod chant. I think it's the first one I've heard in months, and it's while they're playing on the road. A-Rod crushes a liner to deep center and drives in both runs. Hell yeah, I still don't like you, A-Rod, but attaboy. We ended up winning 8-4. So game 3, and I decided I'm chanting A-Rod all game. It's my personal goal to get him out of this slump. So every at-bat, let's go, A-Rod, clap, 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 clap. First inning, he hit a 2-run homer, and we all erupt. In the second inning, the chant is louder, and he drives in Jeets with a single. Fourth inning, we're even louder, and he reached on an error. Fifth inning, A-Rod walks. Seventh inning, he drove in Jeets and Damon with a single. And finally, he strikes out in the eighth. But all in all, A-Rod went 3 for 5 with 4 RBIs, and he had Yankee fan support the entire game. Support that I hadn't seen in months. A-Rod went on to play the Mets and have solid outings. Steadily, his batting average went up from the .213 it was when he arrived in Atlanta to .286 by the end of the regular season. Then he absolutely crushed it during the postseason. So, yeah, I contributed to that. I know players can get hyped by the fans, so I figured I'd show him support because even though I didn't particularly like him, we needed his bat to perform. I've actually changed my mind on him since he's retired. As a commentator now, he's actually really likable, and he clearly knows his stuff, so A-Rod, you're a good folk. And if you liked any of these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video, and thanks for hanging with me on this one.